the beginning of the end. At the dawn of the 20th century, the British Empire stood at the height of its power. Its territories stretched across every inhabited continent. Nearly 1/4 of the world's population lived under British rule. London had become the financial center of the global economy, while the Royal Navy remained the most powerful fleet ever assembled. To many observers, the empire appeared unstoppable. But beneath this image of strength, new challenges were quietly emerging. Powerful nations such as Germany, the United States, Japan, and Russia were rapidly expanding their industries, armies, and economies. Technological progress that had once given Britain a decisive advantage was now spreading across the world. For the first time in centuries, Britain faced competitors capable of matching its power. Many historians describe this period as the beginning of a new global balance. The empire was still enormous, but it was no longer alone at the top. Meanwhile, Europe itself had become increasingly unstable. Military alliances divided the continent into rival camps. Nationalism grew stronger every year, while competition for colonies created dangerous tensions between Europe's great powers. A single spark could ignite the entire continent. That spark came in the summer of 1914. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo triggered a chain reaction that soon drew nearly every major power into war. What many believed would be a short conflict quickly became the deadliest war humanity had ever experienced. The First World War. Britain entered the conflict immediately. But unlike previous wars, this was not simply Britain's struggle. The entire empire joined the fight. Soldiers arrived from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and numerous African colonies. Millions of men from every corner of the empire fought under the same flag. Indian troops served on the Western Front, in the Middle East, and across Africa. Australian and New Zealand forces became famous during the Gallipoli campaign. Canadian soldiers earned international respect during battles such as Vimy Ridge. The war demonstrated something remarkable. The British Empire was not just Britain. It had become a global community connected by loyalty, trade, and military cooperation. Yet this unity came at an enormous cost. Modern machine guns, heavy artillery, poison gas, tanks, and aircraft transformed warfare into industrial slaughter. Entire generations disappeared in the trenches of France and Belgium. Millions never returned home. One common myth is that Britain emerged from the First World War stronger than ever. Because it was among the victorious nations, the reality was very different. Britain had won the war, but victory came at an extraordinary price. The country accumulated massive debts. Its economy weakened. Entire cities mourned lost generations. Across the empire, people began asking difficult questions. If colonial soldiers had fought and died alongside British troops, should they not also enjoy greater political rights? Calls for self-government grew louder. Nationalist movements gained momentum in many colonies. Perhaps nowhere were these demands stronger than in India. Leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi began organizing peaceful campaigns demanding greater independence from British rule. Instead of armed rebellion, Gandhi promoted nonviolent resistance, civil disobedience, and mass public protest. His movement inspired millions. The empire faced a challenge unlike any it had encountered before. It could defeat armies, but defeating an idea proved much harder. Meanwhile, another unexpected problem emerged. The United States had become one of the world's largest industrial economies. Germany had demonstrated extraordinary technological and military strength before its defeat. Japan rapidly modernized its navy and industry. Britain was no longer the unquestioned leader of the world. The global balance of power was shifting. Even so, after the war ended in 1918, the British Empire actually reached its greatest territorial size. Former German and Ottoman territories in Africa and the Middle East came under British administration through League of Nations mandates. On maps, the empire appeared larger than ever. In reality, however, appearances could be deceptive. Maintaining such an enormous empire had become increasingly expensive. Economic recovery proved slow. Political unrest spread across many colonies. New ideas about national self-determination continued to gain support around the world. The age of empires was beginning to change. Few people realized it then, but an even greater catastrophe was approaching. Within just 20 years, another global war would push the British Empire to its absolute limits. And after that war, nothing would ever be the same again. The fall of the British Empire. When the Second World War began in 1939, Britain once again found itself fighting for survival. Unlike the First World War, This conflict threatened not only Britain's empire but the very existence of the nation itself. Nazi Germany rapidly conquered much of Europe. France fell in just 6 weeks. For a time, Britain stood almost alone against Adolf Hitler. The British Empire once again answered the call. Soldiers arrived from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and colonies across Africa and the Caribbean. Factories throughout the empire supplied weapons, food, fuel, and raw materials. Merchant ships crossed dangerous oceans despite constant attacks from German submarines. The entire empire became part of the war effort. One of Britain's greatest victories came during the Battle of Britain. In 1940, the German Luftwaffe launched a massive air campaign designed to destroy Britain's air defenses before a planned invasion. Day after day, British and Allied pilots defended the skies above southern England. Radar stations, a revolutionary technology at the time, allowed the Royal Air Force to detect incoming enemy aircraft before they arrived. Combined with the courage of thousands of pilots, this gave Britain a crucial advantage. After months of fierce fighting, Germany abandoned its invasion plans. For the first time, Hitler had suffered a major defeat. Many historians consider the Battle of Britain one of the most important turning points of the entire war. Had Britain fallen, the course of world history might have been completely different. But although Britain survived, the war demanded enormous sacrifices. Cities such as London, Coventry, and Liverpool endured devastating bombing campaigns. Millions of civilians spent countless nights inside underground shelters. Food was rationed. Factories operated around the clock. Nearly every family felt the impact of war. Meanwhile, the empire's soldiers fought across North Africa, Italy, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. Indian troops became one of the largest volunteer armies in history, with more than 2 million men serving during the war. Canadian forces played vital roles during the Battle of the Atlantic and the Normandy landings. Australian and New Zealand soldiers fought across North Africa and the Pacific. The war once again demonstrated that Britain's strength depended heavily upon its global empire. Yet another myth emerged after the victory. Many people believed Britain had won the war as the world's dominant superpower. The reality was almost the opposite. Victory came at an enormous financial cost. Britain had borrowed vast sums of money, especially from the United States. Much of its industrial infrastructure had been damaged. Its economy was exhausted. For the first time in centuries, Britain could no longer afford to maintain such a vast empire. At the same time, nationalist movements became stronger than ever. Across Asia and Africa, millions questioned why they should remain under colonial rule after fighting for freedom. During the war, calls for independence became impossible to ignore. Nowhere was this more significant than in India. For decades, leaders including Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru had demanded self-government through political campaigns, peaceful protests, and civil disobedience. After the war, British leaders increasingly accepted that maintaining control through force was neither practical nor sustainable. In 1947, Britain granted independence to India. It was one of the most significant moments in modern history. However, independence also brought tragedy. British India was divided into two new nations, India and Pakistan. The partition triggered one of the largest migrations in human history. More than 10 million people crossed newly created borders. Violence between religious communities claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Families that had lived together for generations suddenly found themselves separated by international frontiers. The end of British rule marked both a triumph of independence and a profound human tragedy. The loss of India became a turning point for the empire. Known as the jewel in the crown, India had been Britain's most valuable colony. If Britain could no longer govern India, many questioned whether the empire itself still had a future. Other colonies soon demanded greater independence. Burma gained independence in 1948. Ceylon followed the same year. Across Africa, nationalist leaders organized peaceful campaigns and political movements demanding self-rule. The process of decolonization had begun. Unlike earlier centuries, Britain increasingly chose negotiation over large-scale military conquest. Although conflicts still occurred in several regions, many colonies achieved independence through political agreements rather than prolonged wars. The empire that had once expanded across the globe was slowly transforming into something entirely different. It was no longer an empire of conquest. It was becoming a voluntary association of independent nations. But one final crisis would convince even the strongest supporters that the age of the British Empire was truly over. That moment would come in Egypt. The Suez Crisis would reveal that Britain was no longer the world's leading superpower. A new era had begun. The legacy of the British Empire, the final chapter of the British Empire, did not end with a dramatic battle. There was no single moment when the world's largest empire simply disappeared. Instead, it faded gradually, one colony at a time. By the middle of the 20th century, Britain was no longer the dominant global power it had once been. The Second World War had changed everything. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's new superpowers, while European colonial empires struggled to survive in a rapidly changing world. The event that truly demonstrated Britain's declining influence came in 1956. It became known as the Suez Crisis, when Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain and France launched a military operation to regain control of this vital waterway. From a military perspective, the invasion initially succeeded. British and French forces quickly occupied key positions. But something unexpected happened. The United States strongly opposed the operation. So did the Soviet Union. Facing intense international pressure and severe economic consequences, Britain was forced to withdraw. For many historians, the Suez Crisis marked the moment Britain ceased to be a global superpower. It was no longer able to act independently on the world stage. The age of the British Empire was effectively over. During the following decades, independence spread rapidly. Ghana became the first British colony in sub-Saharan Africa to gain independence in 1957. Nigeria followed in 1960. Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago became independent in 1962. Kenya achieved independence in 1963. One after another, former colonies became sovereign nations. By the late 20th century, most of Britain's overseas empire had peacefully come to an end. Yet something remarkable happened. Many newly independent countries chose not to completely sever their ties with Britain. Instead, they joined a new international organization, the Commonwealth of Nations. Unlike the empire, the Commonwealth was built on voluntary cooperation rather than colonial rule. Today it includes more than 50 independent countries spread across every inhabited continent. Together they represent over 2.5 billion people. It became one of the largest international associations in the world. A common myth claims that when the British Empire disappeared, its influence vanished as well. Nothing could be further from the truth. Its legacy remains visible almost everywhere. English became one of the world's dominant international languages. Many legal systems around the world still follow principles developed under British law. Parliamentary democracy in numerous countries was influenced by Britain's political traditions. Railways built during the colonial era continued to carry millions of passengers. Ports established centuries ago remain major centers of global trade. Cricket, football, rugby, and countless other sports spread across continents through the empire. Financial institutions founded in London helped shape modern international banking. Even everyday customs from afternoon tea to driving on the left side of the road in many countries reflect Britain's historical influence. Of course, the empire's legacy is not viewed in the same way by everyone. For some, it represents exploration, scientific progress, industrial innovation, global trade, and the spread of modern institutions. For others, it recalls colonial rule, economic exploitation, slavery, famines, cultural destruction, and struggles for independence. Both perspectives are part of the historical record. Modern historians increasingly agree that understanding the British Empire requires acknowledging both its extraordinary achievements and the immense human suffering experienced by many people living under imperial rule. History is rarely simple. Empires are built through ambition, innovation, courage, conflict, cooperation, and sacrifice. They also leave behind victories, tragedies, and lessons for future generations. The British Empire lasted for more than 4 centuries. At its greatest extent, it ruled nearly 1/4 of the Earth's land surface and governed almost 1 out of every 4 people alive. No empire in recorded history had ever reached such global scale. Yet even the greatest empire eventually came to an end. Its story reminds us that no nation remains powerful forever. The world is constantly changing. New powers rise, old powers decline, and history continues to move forward. The British Empire may no longer exist, but its influence can still be seen in the languages we speak, the laws we follow, the institutions we build, and the connections that link nations across the globe. Its story is not simply the history of Britain. It is part of the history of the modern world. Thank you for joining this journey through one of history's greatest empires. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with fellow history enthusiasts. There are many more remarkable civilizations, empires, and forgotten stories waiting to be explored. Until next time, keep discovering history.